And there's obviously a lot of talks on Jupyter Hub, Jupyter Lab, and different kinds of offshoots from the Jupyter technologies. All right, well, it is 3 o'clock, and so I'd like to welcome everybody to this month's Interoperability and Technology Committee Tech Dive series. And just a reminder that this is our webpage here for the IT&I committee, as we call it, and you can join our mailing list here if you want to be alerted to future talks, if somebody has just forwarded you this information about this talk. And you can always go to our activities here on this link here, which basically just shows you all the tech talks that we've had previously. And on every talk, there's a recording that's on YouTube, so you can go watch and pause it and watch it again to your heart's content. I'm very excited today to hear about GeoServer developments, and we have with us Jody, Garnett, and Kevin Smith from Boundless. You guys have your webcam on?
We do.
Somewhere here. Oh, there you are. How are you guys? And we'll probably, let's see, why don't you guys drop your, now that we've seen you, we can drop your webcam, and I will make you guys, I'll just, without further ado, I will make you the presenter, and we can switch over, hear a little bit more about you guys and about what you've been working on. So I'm making you the presenter now. You should be able to share your screen.
Sounds good. I'll start my presentation.
And that is almost looking good.
And can you guys see this little GoToMeeting channel? Okay.
No.
Good.
Yeah, looks good.
Thanks. Well, glad to meet everyone. Thanks very much for inviting us. We're giving you a little preview of a talk we're going to be doing at a couple of events over the course of the summer. The first one is in the free and open source software for geospatial event in Europe. That's a regional event put on by the Open Source Geospatial Foundation. And then we're also presenting at the really big global Phosphor-G conference that's happening this year in Boston. If you haven't heard of those conferences, I do encourage you to check it out. The global conference only comes to the US once every 3 years, and it's a really good opportunity. Now, this talk is the talk we do every year to talk about developments in the and what's been new in R&D in the GeoServer project. And so this is a joint talk. Our co-presenter who's not with us here is called Andrea Amy. He's from the GeoSolutions team in Italy, and provide a whole bunch of really great commercial solutions and support around GeoServer and other projects. Myself, I'm Jody Garnett. I work with Boundless in the Victoria office, and I'm also a lead on the GeoServer project, just like Andrea Amy. I also do some volunteer work with a couple of the software foundations, noticeably the Open Source Geospatial Foundation and the Eclipse Foundation.
And I'm Kevin Smith. I'm also with Boundless and a member of the GeoServer PSC and the project lead for GeoWebCache, which is used as a component in GeoServer.
Thanks for joining us, Kevin. We should give a thanks to our employer Boundless for for employing us, but also all the great work they do to support this project. So this is an update for GeoServer for 2017. I don't know how many people we have in this conversation, but I do encourage lots of questions to come in. I'd much rather have this as a two-way conversation. So I'd like to just focus here a little bit about what GeoServer does. This isn't primarily the focus of this talk, but it provides a starting point. So GeoServer is a Java web application, and its job is to publish geospatial information. And the idea is that once you've configured your data in GeoServer, GeoServer is going to do its best to support as many of the protocols as we possibly can. So we've got all core OGC protocols, Web Map Server, Web Feature Server. We were one of the first implementations to support Web Feature Server Transactional, which allows editing. We also have web coverage service that gives us the direct access to raster data. And then as optional extensions, we support web processing service and one called Catalog Service Web, which enables kind of machine-to-machine discovery of what information is being published.
And then we also support several cacheable tile protocols via GeoWeb Cache. WMTS is the sort of official OGC one. And then there are two reasonably well-used less official ones, TMS and WMSC, and an assortment of rather obscure ones as well.
Fair enough.
What is WMSC? Or are you going to get into that?
I can describe it. I'm totally happy to stop here. So the way in which the pecking order works with standards is often the open source projects figure out a standard or a convention on their own in order to compete or in order to try out a new idea. And then over time, that's refined, and then it's packaged up by one of the standards bodies, such as the OGC. So WMSC was actually a small informal meeting at one of the FOSS4G conferences in 2006 in Switzerland, where a bunch of open source projects got together and defined how they were going to implement a tiling protocol extending Web Map Server. So inside Web Map Server, there's this Git capabilities document. As part of that, there's a vendor extensions area, which defines the tile sets, as well as all the recipe for how clients can systematically make the same Git map requests. And as long as clients are all following that same formula, then they can be used as a tile service. Does that help?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. And over time, that idea was tried out by the community, and the result went on to inform the OGC Web Map Tile Service specification.
Okay, so
the same thing happened with TMS as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so WMTS is a little bit of an evolution then of those others?
Correct, yeah. So TMS was an initial one done by Metacarta, which was a single vendor. The community, including Metacarta, went ahead and defined WMSC because we could not wait, due to market forces, for the OGC to come up with a standard. And about 5 years later, the OGC, or the industry standards body, came out with WMTS. And just to continue on with the pecking order, successful OGC standards go on to be jointly published as ISO standards. So Web Map Service is an example of that. WMS 130 was published as a joint standard with ISO. So,
perfect, thank you.
Yeah, we're totally happy to geek out about standards if you like.
Good.
Okay, any other questions? There's a question, does GeoServer support MBTs? I'm trying to figure out what MBT is. Maybe someone can translate that.
So Mapbox vector tiles?
Perhaps. Yeah, we will get to that as one of the new features, and we'll talk about that. Okay. Any other questions before I move on? An important part about how GeoServer works, GeoServer is designed to be a good middleware application. So we want you to be able to add GeoServer to your infrastructure, and we want it to be able to publish the information that you already have in-house. So we want you to be able to publish your information out of Esri, out of Oracle Spatial, out of PostGIS, out of Mr. SID. Whatever information you have, we want GeoServer to be able to play that middleware role and be able to speak the standard protocols for you. Okay, so just a health checkup. This is more of interest to a developer crowd. We want to say that the GeoServer project is healthy. We're pulling in a lot of commits. Commits are changes or improvements to the code base. We've got a healthy setup where we've got teams from around the world development teams, and also individual contractors that are getting paid to work on GeoServer, and that's resulting in a steady stream of pull requests, improving the project. Now, normally we also report about the user list and how active our user community is. Unfortunately, our hosting provider called SourceForge has now restricted us from accessing that information. One thing we do at GeoServer is we like to be very business focused or very predictable. So GeoServer has adopted a time box release model. That means you can always know when a release of GeoServer is coming out and plan your upgrades and system maintenance around it. So GeoServer has 2 releases going at any one time. So the one release is called the stable release. And that release is stable, it's supported, it's recommended for new production systems. And that stable release will receive both bug fixes, security, vulnerability fixes, and it'll also receive the occasional new feature as new features are made available through our QA process. After 6 months, a release enters maintenance, and it only receives bug fixes and security fixes. Now, GeoServer is an open project, and it is open to outside development. So occasionally you will see a release that is published by a volunteer sometime after it has been adopted by the community. I'm sorry, having my screen taken away from me by a phone call. I fixed it. Okay. So just to let you know, we're coming up to the end of the GeoServer 2.11 release cycle, and GeoServer 2.12 will be taking over in September. I don't know what versions you guys are deploying internally. I'd love to know that if people would give me that information in the chat. A little bit of a note about the user list participation. We are having a little bit of trouble as our developers focusing on their paying customers, making sure that we're taking care of our user list. We also need to take care that our user list is self-sufficient and people are being kind and helping each other. Another thing we've been working on is doing a monthly bug stomp in order to take care of the code base and keep up with bug reports as they come in. We have been doing that in an ad hoc fashion, but as our developer community has gotten really busy, that was not being sustainable in 2016. So we started introducing a monthly, setting aside a day for teams across the world to really focus on this together. So that happens the last Friday of each month. Oh, someone's using 2.11, well done. Someone's working on 2.9. So 2.9's not receiving any more security updates, so I'm going to recommend you update. Another thing we've been doing is we've been setting up these code sprints. So this is where we assemble people from all over the world in a single location to work on some of the bigger issues in the code base. And usually these issues are not very exciting or sexy. Usually they're code maintenance issues of some sort. So a feature of GeoServer that's really popular is called the REST API, which is used to automatically or to automate the configuration of your GeoServer. And the library we used for our REST API has gotten a little bit out of date. So we gathered together a team and did some fundraising, and GeoSolutions hosted us in Italy to go through and update our REST API. And more importantly for everyone, as part of that exercise, we wrote documentation for it. And so this is a REST API documentation called Swagger, and it lets you drill in and explore all the different REST API endpoints and how you can configure and set up your layers remotely. Any questions on that one? That one's quite exciting for us.
That is cool.
Has anyone seen that? Maybe at the end of the talk, I'll bring up those REST docs. They're quite fun. GeoServer works with both vector and raster data.
Excuse me.
Yep.
Are you guys happy with? This is Ted Haberman. Are you happy with Swagger for describing this API? Just in terms of, I was in a discussion actually at the last OGC meeting up in Canada. talking about Swagger as an API description mechanism?
We were okay with it. We did run into some limitations with it. I'm just still sharing my screen. I'm just going to bring up the Swagger docs. We certainly did run into some limitations with it, but there's a difference between the Swagger specification that you're writing down and the output you get out of the different tools. And so we were far happier with the Swagger that we wrote down rather than the details we were able to get out of any specific tool. And we were starting from nothing, so the best advice we could offer to people using the REST API was to configure it by hand, do a query, and then have a look at what the result was. So I quite like this. We can request information. We've got documented examples of JSON and XML and so on. So we were quite happy with the level of detail we were able to get. But the real limiting factor for us was not Swagger. It was actually getting a hold of the developer time to actually document this.
Is that because your developers all write self-documenting code?
No, it's because, honestly, it's because a lot of our developers work for money. And customers tend to really focus on a feature they want. And it's very hard to leave additional time over for documentation and quality assurance. Occasionally, we've got functionality which we have to reject because although someone's paid for it, there hasn't been enough budget to bring it up to the standards that we require for the project.
Thanks.
Yeah. Sorry if that's a cold, harsh truth. So back to vector data sources. Has anyone heard of GeoPackage? For this crowd that's interested in standards, it defines a SQLite database that can contain vector or raster data. And it's an OGC standard that we're very fond of here in Boundless. And it's supported by both Qgis and GeoServer and other projects. For anyone from an Esri background, it works similar to a personal file geodatabase. There was also an initial popular community project called Spatial Light, which explored this idea, but is mostly the work of a single developer. So it's another good example of an open source project exploring the territory and then it being standardized over time. It is an extension that's available in the library we use called GeoTool. And we'd like to promote that to be a first class extension for the next release of GeoServer. A couple of really quick ones. We've got an importer in GeoServer, which allows you to import GeoJSON files in this case, and import them into Qgis and publish it in one step. We'd also like to make that GeoJSON file reading ability available to publish just directly. And it's the same thing with comma-separated values. We've got an importer that lets you import into Qgis and publish. We'd like to make it available so people can directly publish a CSV file. CSV files aren't indexed, so performance might be a little bit of a trouble, but because these files are relatively small, we're not incredibly concerned about that. Another fun one is MongoDB, which is one of these big cloud document databases. Is anyone using MongoDB in your organization? We're looking at extending our MongoDB support so it can make use of complex features rather than simple features. Complex features do associations, multiple geometries, that kind of thing. Usually quite popular in the scientific community. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure. There's been a lot of, there's a lot of talk about MongoDB, but I can't speak for our organization. There's other organizations on the line here that probably understand, or people from different organizations. I'm sure some of the organizations that are represented here are using MongoDB.
Okay, fair enough. Another interesting feature of GeoServer is you can use GeoServer to cascade other web services. GeoServer actually acts as a full client to talk to the other service. So it's not just simply rerouting each request, it's actually making the request using the correct protocol, and it allows GeoServer to translate between protocols. So as part of this, we're looking at setting up GeoServer as a web map tile service client, and that would allow us to surface web map tile service data as part of a normal get map or WCS request. So that's a work in progress. We're expecting it to land in GeoServer 2.12. And I actually saw this functionality in this slide first. The contribution only showed up on the email list this morning. Another fun one.
Could I ask just a quick? Is that something that would make like an animation client side work quite much better? Say a time-dependent WMS or WMTS request, or
there's a number of ways.
No?
So this wasn't to do with time. This was to do with tile service.
Right.
It was more the fact that you could use a single GeoServer as a front end, and you might have individual tile servers inside your organization's DMZ, and so you would be using GeoServer as a front end. Or maybe you've got like an Esri WMTS implementation, but you'd like to use GeoServer as a front end in order to speak more protocols.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yep.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. This is an interesting one for anyone working with raster data. We've had a fair bit of R&D over the last 2 years looking at pulling together image mosaics that are actually from multiple different data sources. So maybe it's organized by a topic rather than by a specific sensor, or the DMs might have been generated at different periods in history. So the idea here is you can set up a heterogeneous image mosaic and stitch them all together into a single data product, even though the granules might be from different sources. NetCDF, another raster format that's very popular in the scientific community. There's been a number of improvements here. Unfortunately, it's a little bit beyond my knowledge, so I have to check with these developers to see what's been done.
Just a quick question there. Is that on, I assume that's reading from NetCDF, like reading raster data from NetCDF or something, and then?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I know they've been doing a lot of work with around polar coordinates and other things from NetCDF. And they've also been doing a lot of like multi-dimensional raster information out of NetCDF. I don't know the specifics because I don't get to work with raster data a lot myself.
Okay.
I had one other question there. Are they using the NetCDF library or are they using the GDAL library?
They're using a NetCDF library. I think the Java one. They do have a good relationship with the NetCDF team. The developer I mentioned there, Ben Cardack-Davies from New Zealand, actually contributed a couple changes upstream to the NetCDF team. So we identified and fixed problems in GeoServer, some of which needed to be pushed back to the NetCDF project to fix a problem that was in their code base.
Thanks.
Yeah. So we try to play nice with others, or at least Ben does. One of the primary uses people have for GeoServer is to use it to publish information visually. Kind of makes sense. We're working with geospatial data. A lot of people are familiar with OGC's style layer descriptor. And that is a very popular way to configure GeoServer, but it's not the only one. OGC style layer descriptor is primarily intended, like most of these standards, for machine-to-machine communication. And we support a number of languages that are a little bit more focused on humans. But just to begin with, I'll focus on a big change we've done to the GeoServer style editor. The GeoServer style editor used to only let you edit the text file, and it didn't let you easily preview the result. And we've taken an idea that was prototyped. And so what we've got now here is when you look at the style editor, you can see your style at the bottom of the screen. And there's these tabs along the top, which lets you see a bunch of reference information from a description of the name of the style and what format it's in, to actually getting a live layer preview, so you can actually look at the style as you're editing it, rather than bouncing between different screens. So it's one of these things that has made GeoServer far more pleasant to use. Has anyone had a chance to try out that functionality in GeoServer 2.11? Okay. The other one here is one of the style formats that's more focused on humans is file format on cascading style sheets. And it's had a bunch of R&D put into it by Andrea Amy. In particular, it now supports rendering transformations. So this is when you use SLD in order to process the data as it comes out of the database. So you might turn point data into raster data by using a heat map transformation, or you might turn a raster data into vector data by using a contour operation, as you can see in this example. Now these operations, these transformations, are also available through the web processing service endpoint. So in a sense, we're letting you draw the results of processing the data. Okay, another one that we've been working on is a YAML format that's based on SLD. CSS is very nice in that it appeals to web developers that are familiar with this approach to styling. YAML provides a kind of a cut down text representation of the same ideas that are in OGC style layer descriptor. So this is really nice in that it's a one-to-one representation of SLD. So you can actually take your existing SLD files and automatically convert them into YSLD. Yep. You're pointing out something?
Someone wants to be the presenter.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that's about. Maybe later, is this to show us an example of something, or?
Maybe. Okay.
Yeah, that's cool. That YAML is cool because for the rest of us who are not web developers, that's a little more accessible.
Yeah. It's also really nice because people have the occasional like 3,000 line SLD, and once they convert it into this format, it ends up taking 500 lines, and there's other tricks you can do to minimize it. And this is an interesting bit of R&D we're doing here at Boundless, and we're donating to the community. And it's allowing GeoServer to natively support Mapbox style. So Mapbox style is a JSON representation of styling. It's not quite as rich or as flavorful as SLD, but it is very accessible, especially to web developers. And it allows us to get the same visual from GeoServer as we do from OpenLayers or the Mapbox GL clients. So it's a really good fit with vector tiles, for example. Any questions on that one? I'd love it if there were questions because we're quite excited about it.
There's a question in chat.
So we can double back to that. Unfortunately for me, the question is, can you elaborate about how to migrate to GeoServer for people that are locked into ArcSD? There's a couple things. One is that GeoServer can directly publish your information that you've stored in ArcSD. So you can just keep running your ArcSD, GeoServer can connect to it, and can be used to publish information out of your ArcSD. That actually can be a solution in terms of scalability. Also, GeoServer speaks a few more protocols than ArcSD does. Another solution is to actually migrate your data and have GeoServer take over the data publishing section. The big difficulty there is, of course, migrating your styling. We partner with a company called GeoCat, and they have a product called GeoCat Bridge, which can be used to convert your ArcSD styles to SLD. But I don't have direct experience of that. I just know that it's available. We work with professional services for that. Does that answer your question, Robert? Okay. And back in the open source world, away from Esri for a moment, QGIS is becoming the dominant player for desktop GIS in the open source community. And we've been taking some steps to improve visual compatibility with it. So a nice thing is they've got the idea to do little vector symbols using fill-in-the-blank sections. So you can use it to specify the colors that the symbols are drawn in. So that's a feature we've added. We've also been working a little bit on our labeling, allowing you to turn on kerning support, and underline, and a few other things that'll visually improve the appearance of labeling. And that's work Andrea's been doing for the community. Andrea's also been looking to showcase all of these features for Phosphor-G conference this summer. He's setting up an example of visualizing OSM, and he should have that ready at some point this summer. He's also had a chance to work over with the QGIS team and actually get QGIS to output valid SLD and to include text symbolizers in their output. So we'll see some good improvements to the QGIS project out of this. Okay. Moving on to Web Map Server. We were looking a little bit at NetCDF that had kind of multi-dimensional raster information going on. Some improvements have been made to WMS in order to better visualize that. Okay. And you can see an example here of this being used in order to produce some nice visualizations and animations of that.
Does that include the ability? Okay, so it does include the ability. The key thing there is the ability to dynamically set the color range, and it looks like you have the min range, max range there. So that's fantastic.
Yeah. See, this is where we would love our co-presenter, Andrea Amy, to be here because he'd be able to speak more directly to this. Okay, back at our comfort zone, we've been working hard with the Boundless Suite team in order to work on outputting vector tiles. And this is actually a collaboration between the team here that works on GeoServer and the team in Europe that works on open layers. So maybe I can invite Kevin to speak a little bit more about this one.
Yeah, so GeoServer can currently export several different vector tile formats, including the Mapbox one and several JSON-based ones. Then these can be loaded into OpenLayers or other vector tile clients. GeoServer does some pre-processing to try and, based on the style, to try and figure out what should be included in the vector tile, because it is obviously not just the raw vector data, it's pre-processed partially to partially render it.
Yeah, it simplifies it and changes how much information is included based on the zoom level.
Yeah, I'm also currently working on adding support for partial, so pre-computed label points. So the client doesn't need to do all of the work of figuring out how to label things. It will be leveraging the existing label placement in GeoServer.
Thanks, Kevin. A really simple one to understand, just to save on bandwidth, we've I think Andrea has added a feature here to store PNG images when there's some transparency involved, or switch over to JPEGs when there's no transparency. And here's the feature Kevin was talking about with better centroid or label placement calculation. That functionality is also being worked on by Justin De La Vera for the KML output. Okay, over to Kevin for tiling.
Yeah, so this is something that GeoSolutions is working on, is an improvement to the tile protocols in GeoWebCache, which will make them more discoverable, so clients can figure out what's available and how to use it, including various alternate dimensions such as time and elevation. So I think someone mentioned animations over time. This will make it so that a client could conceivably connect to GeoWeb Cache and ask, given all the layers you have, which ones have time components and what are those time components and which steps within it should I request.
Yeah, this is a case where we're running into the edge of what the standards allow us to do. In many cases, the standards allow us to make a query, but they fall a little bit short on communicating enough information to the client so the client can make the right query.
Yeah, and this one is, so once GeoWeb Cache has cached these alternate parameters, this acts like sort of a sub cache. So you have several different caches, one for each time step, one for each style, or actually one for each combination of all of those things. And it wasn't keeping track of enough information to properly get rid of things once they were no longer needed, such as when you update a piece of data in GeoServer, the embedded GeoWeb cache will detect that and say, oh, these tiles have been touched, and it would eliminate them, but it would only eliminate them for the default value. So we had to add some additional metadata into the cache in order to keep track of all this so that it could purge tiles that have been touched across all styles and times, or to, if you change which times are valid cached ones, it wouldn't know how to get rid of the old times that are no longer reachable. So this is now something that it can get rid of.
Just one question, Kevin. Is this a bug that's been fixed, or is it just a new feature you had to add in order to work with the time-based tiling servers?
Well, we've been able to do time for a while, so this is making it, yeah, it's hard to say whether this is a bug that we've fixed or a new feature.
Okay. I'd like to just move on to some actually really interesting changes. And this is going to be the one that's going to convince my user that's way back on GeoServer 2.9 to upgrade. So these are some changes that have been made to the GeoServer configuration system that are really significant. So a big one here is a faster startup time for people that are working with really large data directories. And by really large, I'm meaning like 10, 20,000 layers out of the GeoServer. So that did present a performance problem for GeoServer, and it's one that Andrea has worked really hard on fixing. And so you can see from a cold start where none of the files have been seen on the file system. So when you're starting up GeoServer from a cold boot of the hardware, it was taking an awfully long time for GeoServer to start up. And after this change, it's gone down proportionally. This is really important for people that are using GeoServer in a containerized environment where they're depending on GeoServer to start up quickly as they create their container. And more importantly for me is once GeoServer is up and operational, with this change, we're seeing far greater performance. So the average response time is going down and the throughput is increasing as a result. So this is really nice for people that are working with large data directories. Another one that's really good at easing a common frustration with GeoServer is right now when you import a new shapefile into GeoServer, it looks at the PRJ file in order to determine what projection the information's in. And if it can't figure it out, you have to fill in that information by hand. And so traditionally it looks in the PRJ file for an authority code, which not everyone includes. With this change, it's now looking through the EPSG database and trying to find the best match, and it's being successful far more often. So that'll be nice. Another neat one here is a status module. So this is an improvement to the status page of GeoServer, and there's also a REST API, and it allows you to double check the configuration of your GeoServer. Another interesting one is GeoServer does work with styles, and it has a GUI to allow you to edit those styles, but those styles might refer to icons or resources. There's a community project here called Resource Browser, which allows you to upload and download and manage those resources. So things like icons and fonts. And another interesting community module, especially for production systems, is the backup and restore module. So this is used to take up a configuration from your test environment, save it out to a big zip file, and then you could restore that configuration onto your production server. One thing that's really nice is it lets you do a trial run or a dry run and double check that the configuration will work before you apply it. Another significant change done as part of this is the ability to define well-known directories, such as where your raster information is, and refer to those as part of your configuration. Any questions on that one? Those are kind of more down in the weeds for like production systems. Okay. Have a security one here that's also of interest. So there's a security extension done by GeoSolutions allowing OAuth authentication. So if you configure your server with this, it'll allow your users to log in with OAuth providers such as Google. So people would be able to log in with their Google account to GeoServer. Now, I also have this security concerns that have been raised to us over the course of the last year. So just a note about whenever you're reporting a security vulnerability is to practice something called responsible disclosure. So the idea is to contact the team, but not share the exploit details publicly in the issue report. And you might have to be prepared to work quietly with the team to figure out what the problem is, just because we don't want to immediately publish any vulnerabilities with the software until we have a fix in hand. There's a number of different ways to contact people, but a nice way to do it responsibly is using this info@osgeo.org email address. Okay. This security vulnerability policy was something we introduced last year, and it's mostly been successful. So we've had the majority of users contacting us in a responsible fashion. Unfortunately, we did have one user share like a confidential customer report with the user list, and there wasn't really much we could do about that. It didn't necessarily report any exciting vulnerabilities, but it was very embarrassing for all concerned. A note about where the security vulnerabilities reports come from. As a popular open source project, GeoServer is subject to multiple security audits around the world. Now, most of the security audits are automated, and so they end up focusing more on the web UI screen rather than on the web services. And many production systems actually block access to the web UI. But nevertheless, we do our best to resolve any vulnerability reported. So one thing that was worked on was looking at a class of vulnerabilities called denial of service. So we've added a couple configuration options in order to mitigate these kind of attacks. One that was kind of interesting for me, at least, was when your browser auto-completes a username and password, that's considered a security vulnerability. And so we have a configuration option now to disable that for GeoServer. Kinds of things that were reported against the web administration app. The demo request page, it's used to try out different web services. We are now very strictly limit that to the local server. And also there was a category of vulnerabilities called session fixation that were resolved. A little bit more pertinent to me is vulnerabilities with the actual web services themselves. We fixed a couple of them over the course of the year. One was an XML injection vulnerability, and the other one was called an XXE vulnerability, which trying to remember how that one worked. I think it used a problem with, or tricking GeoServer by changing what schema the XML request referred to.
It allowed an entity to be defined that would basically return an arbitrary file from the file system to whoever asked for something.
Yeah. Okay, and then here's one Kevin's working on, I think, currently.
Yeah. So this one we've fixed, but we're trying to come up with a better fix. Yeah. So the various different protocols that GeoWebCache provides, some of them were secured using the rules in GeoServer, some were not, so you could just read an arbitrary set of data out of it. Mm-hmm. So we've locked that down, and we're now working on a cleaner solution that will work for future protocols.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks to the community member Simon Hoffer, who reported that and both provided a fix.
Yeah.
Okay, and this is another interesting one where it's not really a vulnerability, but it's a consideration. GeoServer Web Feature Server does support the transaction operation, so it does allow editing. Many of our users left this on by default and didn't realize that they were allowing the public to edit their data. So we've introduced a restriction on writing to the administrator by default. So GeoServer still supports this functionality, but you're going to have to go in and look at your security configuration and enable this one on purpose. Okay, a couple things looking ahead. We've got to pay attention. There's a new version of Java released sometime this year that we'll have to look at. And we're also looking at replacing our image processing component called Java Advanced Imaging. That's kind of a tour of what we've been up to in the last year. Are there any questions? That was a pretty quick tour.
Well, I just want to say thank you. That was a kind of amazing tour. Yeah, that's a lot of work, by a lot of people, and it's very impressive. I think everybody's unmuted. I've got some questions, but I'll save those in case other folks have questions they want to ask first.
Okay. And I do have to point out that it is it's a real team effort with organizations from around the world. So yeah, as I said, we were learning functionality that will be out this September, just during the course of putting together this presentation. We're like, so what are you planning to do in the next 2 months? So very active project.
Yeah. Anybody out there before? Okay, well, I guess I can go ahead and ask my question then. I sort of jumped the gun there with my when you were talking about the web map tile service. But if we have an application that's consuming WMS, actually in this case, we're consuming model forecast data from NCWMS, and we would like to sort of play like a forecast animation in a loop, and of course that takes a while because in that case it's dynamically querying, for each web map, all the web map tiles that get returned. It sounds like one thing we could explore would be this new functionality to actually use your WMS service that Andrea, I guess, has introduced. But would another possibility be using this GeoWebCache, or is that strictly tied to GeoServer, or?
It's a standalone project that gets pulled into GeoServer as a library, but it can be used completely on its own. You can just plug, so it's able to, the main way it works is it acts as a WMS client, which to get its data, and then serves up an assortment of different tile protocols, the main ones being the ones we mentioned, WMTS, TMS, and WMSC. It can also do Google Maps, Bing, and a bunch of other weird ones.
So GeoServer embeds it as a library in order to, and it's really nicely integrated into GeoServer so that when you add a layer, it also shows up as a tile service. But GeoWebCache can be used independently. And depending on your data needs, you might end up with several GeoServers behind one GeoWebCache in order to keep up. You've got a lot of flexibility with how you deploy these technologies.
Mm-hmm. And would GeoWeb Cache in that case, if it's issuing the WMS requests, would it be able to request those additional parameters of color min, whatever it is, color min scale, color max scale, or whatever that are required to get a decent map out of the NCWMS, or I guess your service as well, this new service you have?
I'm not that familiar with that underlying functionality, but basically GeoWeb Cache has these things called parameter filters that allow you to just say, add this parameter to the request. Here are the legitimate values that can be used, and then it will cache each of those legitimate values as a separate cache.
Okay.
So it sounds like technically the capability's there, but Kevin's being hesitant because he hasn't personally tried it, because that other functionality you point to is relatively new.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm not sure whether that works through request parameters, or it looked to me like it was all sort of taking place under the hood. So you're not doing anything in your request to make it work, in which case, yeah, GeoWeb Cache will handle it just fine. If it requires additional parameters, then you'd have to attach one of these parameter filters to your layer to make it work. But at that point, it'll just work.
Yeah, that sounds very doable. You have a question in the chat if you didn't see it.
Oh, I haven't seen it yet. Yep. In a cloud container-based environment and seeing some periodic issues with unresponsive GeoServer and crashing. Recommended to look at the GeoServer micro instance. Can we speak to this at all? It's an interesting one. So GeoServer is certainly started to be deployed in cloud containers. There's a couple different ways you can set up GeoServer to work in general. GeoServer, using its data directory configuration, is really reliant on the file system. And it looks to me, in your case, like it's certainly stress testing that. Other solutions that people use are to store the configuration in a database. There's even some R&D efforts to store the configuration in a cloud-specific storage technology. So I don't know, I'd have to look at that specific failure in order to get a handle on what the trouble is. So an unresponsive GeoServer and crashing, yeah, that's not a lot of detail to go on. Yeah. One just thing in terms of unresponsive, there's an extension that you should be sure to include called control flow, and that places limits on how much resources an individual request can consume. And it's one of the steps to do in order to get your GeoServer ready for production. It's unclear to me from your message whether it's the GeoServer being unresponsive or something else in your system they're locking up. But the GeoServer, at least, you can put some limits on. Sounds good.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're getting close to the end of the hour here. I just wanted to say, actually, maybe just before wrapping up, that I liked your in the beginning when you were talking about standards, the kind of concept of folks trying things out and as extensions or sort of or unofficial extensions, and making sure they work, and then pushing them back to the OGC, and instead of having them sort of invented by at an OGC meeting by people sitting around the room and imagining what might work or imagining what problems might come up. And it seems like a much healthier model for getting actually functional OGC services. And that's quite encouraging to see that's happening.
I don't want to be too hard on the OGC, because with their test beds, they actually play test their standards and try them out before inflicting them on the public, and that's great. It's one of the reasons I really like the OGC. I'm just going to bring up geojson.org. So this is a really good example of a standard that was developed simply just as a website initially here. And it's proven very popular in the open source and in the geospatial community. And recently this standard has been donated to the Internet Engineering Task Force. There its request for change number. And that's specifically being driven by all the Internet of Things and drones that need to start worrying about spatial data. So here's another example of a standard being put together by enthusiasts, professionals, and then as it becomes popular, moving it over to a standard.
If it's drone, does that include some time capabilities or no? No, I guess that's just the straight.
This is just focused on location here.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay, well, guys, thank you so much. It was a great talk, and of course, everybody feel free to share. Well, the recording will be up probably in a few hours on YouTube, and it will be available on the IT&I webinar series page. So, all right.
Thanks
again. Yep, and we'll see you at Phosphor-G.
Indeed.
All right.
Thanks, guys. Hey, Rich.
Bye-bye, everybody. Yeah.
Cheers.
You want me to do the upload to YouTube?
Sorry?
Do you want me to do the upload to YouTube?
Oh, that would be great.
Okay.
Yeah, if you could do that. Thank you.
I got it.
Awesome. All righty. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.